The bustling chaos of a holiday airport terminal sets the scene. Families wrestle with luggage, holiday shoppers dart through crowds, and announcements echo overhead. Against the cacophony, a young boy, slightly taller than most his age, his posture upright and composed, walks with quiet determination. This is Barron Trump, just 17 years old. Though recognizable to some, he seems to move through the crowd as any other traveler would, dressed in simple jeans and a hoodie, a backpack slung over his shoulder. The camera pans to a commotion near the gate for a delayed flight. A middle-aged veteran named Earl, wearing a faded military jacket and a ball cap, with the words Vietnam Vet, quietly sits in a corner with his cane propped against his chair. His worn duffel bag rests by his feet. His eyes scan the impatient passengers jostling for seats and outlets. Earl's posture is tired but dignified, his silence contrasting with the increasing frustration around him. Nearby, a group of rowdy passengers, seemingly unaware, or perhaps uninterested in, the veteran's presence, argue over seats. A child knocks over Earl's cane, and while the veteran bends down slowly to retrieve it, one of the passengers accidentally kicks his bag. Earl says nothing, his weathered hands tightening around the cane as he leans back into his seat. Barron notices this from a distance. His eyes narrow slightly, assessing the situation. There's something about Earl's quiet, stoic demeanor that strikes him, a man who clearly carries burdens heavier than the duffel at his feet. Barron watches as the passengers continue their careless behavior, oblivious to Earl's presence. As Barron moves closer, he's pulled into a small interaction with a TSA agent, who quietly thanks him for his father's service to the country. Barron smiles politely, but keeps the interaction brief, his attention still fixed on the gate commotion. It's here that we catch the first glimpse of Barron's internal conflict, a young man caught between the weight of a public family legacy and his desire to live an ordinary life. Suddenly, the airline announces that boarding will begin shortly, and the chaos around the gate intensifies. Earl struggles to stand, his cane slipping from his grip as passengers push past him. No one stops to help. It's in this moment, as the camera lingers on Earl's defeated expression, that Barron takes a decisive step forward. The narrator's voice chimes in with a reflective tone, almost like a storyteller leaning in to share a secret. Sometimes, in the smallest moments of neglect, we see the biggest opportunities for kindness. And sometimes, it takes someone completely unexpected to remind us what humanity really means. Barron approaches Earl with quiet confidence, bending down to pick up the cane. His soft-spoken words, "Let me help you, sir," cut through the noise around them. Earl looks up, startled but grateful, and a faint smile breaks through his otherwise weary face. The act ends with Barron helping Earl navigate through the crowded gate area, a subtle yet powerful gesture that sets the tone for what's to come. The camera lingers on their silhouettes as they walk toward the jet bridge, the chaos of the terminal fading into the background. The flight is nearly full, with passengers jostling for overhead bin space and squeezing into their seats. Barron helps Earl to his assigned seat, which is inconveniently located near the back of the plane in the middle row. Earl grunts in discomfort as he eases himself into the cramped space. The veteran's cane rests awkwardly against his leg, and his old duffel bag barely fits beneath the seat in front of him. "Looks like I'm in for a long flight," Earl mutters with a self-deprecating chuckle. Barron glances around, noticing that no one has offered Earl any assistance or shown him the slightest courtesy. A group of passengers across the aisle loudly complains about delays, their voices rising above the hum of boarding activity. One of them, a brash, suited businessman, sneers in Earl's direction. "They should really get these old-timers priority seats or something. They're always slowing everything down," he remarks, earning a round of chuckles from his companions. Barron freezes for a moment, his jaw tightening. He knows the weight of being judged unfairly, though perhaps for different reasons. His gaze flickers back to Earl, who pretends not to have heard the comment but grips his cane with a white-knuckled hand. Suddenly, Barron's decision is clear. He straightens up, his tall frame commanding attention even in the crowded cabin. He approaches a flight attendant, a kind but frazzled woman named Maria, and asks if there's any way Earl can be moved to a more comfortable seat. Maria looks torn, explaining that the flight is overbooked and there's little flexibility. "It's fine, kid," Earl says quietly, though his tired eyes betray his discomfort. "I've had worse rides." But Barron isn't deterred. He makes a quick decision and tells Maria, "Take my seat. Move him up." Maria hesitates, but Barron insists, leaving no room for argument. Moments later, Earl is guided to Barron's first-class seat near the front of the plane. As Earl settles in, he gives Barron a look of gratitude that speaks louder than words. Barron quietly takes Earl's spot in the crowded back row. The businessman across the aisle smirks. "Big guy, you sure that's your seat?" Barron ignores him, leaning back against the window with a quiet sense of purpose. The inciting moment has disrupted not just Barron's physical space, but also his perspective, setting him on a path that will challenge both his values and his sense of responsibility. The plane ascends into the clouds, but tension inside the cabin remains firmly grounded. Barron sits in the cramped middle seat, his long legs awkwardly folded into the limited space. Next to him, a toddler wails, her harried mother doing her best to calm her down. On the other side, the same businessman from earlier sits with his noise-canceling headphones on, completely uninterested in the chaos around him. Barron shifts uncomfortably, the edges of the moment starting to weigh on him. The voices of doubt creep in. What was the point of giving up his seat? Did it even matter? Earl seemed grateful, sure, but it's not like one kind gesture could change anything. He glances toward the front of the plane where Earl is now sitting. The veteran leans back, visibly more relaxed, a flight attendant handing him a warm cup of coffee. There's something reassuring about the sight, but it's quickly interrupted by the businessman's voice cutting through again. "You know," the man says loudly, pointing a thumb toward the first-class section, "people like him don't even appreciate it. Give them something nice, and they act like they're entitled to it." Barron feels heat rise in his chest, but he doesn't respond. Instead, he grips the armrest, his knuckles turning white. His mother's voice echoes in his mind. "Pick your battles wisely, Barron." But the man doesn't stop. "Kids like you don't get it either," he adds, smirking. "Born with a silver spoon, thinking you can just play the hero for show." Barron exhales sharply, the frustration bubbling to the surface. He opens his mouth to respond but catches himself. Instead, he turns his attention back to the window, staring out at the endless sky. His restraint feels like a small defeat. The flight attendant, Maria, notices the tension and steps in, asking the businessman to lower his voice. She gives Barron a quick, understanding smile, but it does little to lift his spirits. A few hours into the flight, turbulence shakes the plane, jolting passengers awake. The commotion causes a few carry-on bags to fall from the overhead bins. One of them lands squarely on Earl's lap. Barron sees it happen and immediately gets up, making his way to the front despite the seatbelt sign flashing. "Are you okay, sir?" Barron asks as he picks up the bag and places it back in the bin. Earl nods, though he looks shaken. Barron notices the flight attendants are busy calming other passengers and decides to stay by Earl for a moment. "You didn't have to come up here," Earl says softly. "I couldn't just sit there," Barron replies, the frustration in his voice now replaced by quiet determination. The turbulence subsides, but Barron remains standing for a few moments longer, his hand resting on the back of Earl's seat. In this moment, he realizes the weight of his decision. His actions may not change the world, but they can change something. As he heads back to his seat, the businessman sneers again, but Barron doesn't even glance his way. There's a growing clarity in his resolve. This is bigger than a seat on a plane. The flight settles back into a tentative calm after the turbulence, but Barron's mind is restless. He watches Earl from a distance, the veteran quietly sipping his coffee, oblivious to the weight his presence has placed on Barron's thoughts. The rows between them feel like a chasm, one that separates not just physical space, but two entirely different lives. Barron slumps in his seat, the businessman beside him scrolling through his phone with smug disinterest. The toddler next to him has finally fallen asleep, her mother leaning back with an exhausted sigh. The quiet should be comforting, but it isn't. Something gnaws at Barron, an unease he can't quite name. Then, over the intercom, the captain announces another wave of turbulence ahead. It's a routine morning, but it sends a ripple of anxiety through the cabin. Maria, the flight attendant, makes her rounds, checking on passengers and securing loose items. She stops by Barron's row and leans down. "Thank you for what you did earlier," she says in a low voice, glancing toward Earl. "I've been doing this job for years, and I don't see kindness like that often." Barron offers a small smile, but her words don't feel like praise. Instead, they feel like a challenge. If it was such a small thing, why doesn't anyone else do it? Why does it feel so heavy? As Maria moves on, Barron overhears a conversation happening a few rows ahead. Two younger passengers are discussing Earl, their voices just loud enough to carry. "Did you see his jacket? Vietnam vet, right?" one says. "Yeah," the other replies, lowering their voice slightly. "I read somewhere those guys never got the recognition they deserved. Came back, and everyone just forgot about them." The words hit Barron like a slap. He looks back at Earl, who now appears even smaller in his oversized seat, a man who fought for his country, only to be treated like an afterthought. The reality of it twists something inside Barron, a realization that his simple gesture wasn't just a moment of kindness. It was a necessary correction to something deeply broken. As if on cue, Earl's voice carries across the aisle. He's speaking to another passenger, an older woman seated beside him. "I don't fly much," he says, his tone light but tinged with something heavier. "Spent most of my time on the road after the war. I guess I got used to keeping to myself." The woman nods politely, but Earl's words linger in Barron's mind. There's an unspoken loneliness in them, the kind that comes from a lifetime of being overlooked. Barron suddenly feels an overwhelming urge to do more, to somehow make Earl's journey more than just a quiet trip home. The turning point comes when the plane begins its descent, and the captain asks passengers to prepare for landing. As Barron adjusts his seatbelt, Maria approaches again, handing him a piece of paper. "This was passed back from Mr. Earl," she says with a knowing smile. Barron unfolds the paper to find a simple note written in shaky handwriting. "You remind me of someone I used to know, a friend I lost a long time ago. He would have done the same thing you did. Thank you for reminding me that good people are still out there. Earl." The words hit Barron harder than he expected. He feels a lump form in his throat as he folds the note and tucks it into his pocket. For the first time, he sees himself not as someone caught between expectations or obligations, but as someone capable of making a real difference, no matter how small the moment may seem. As the plane lands, Barron resolves to do more than just leave Earl with a good memory. The realization dawns on him. This is not just about a kind gesture. It's about honoring the unseen and unspoken sacrifices of people like Earl. It's about stepping into the role of someone who can amplify kindness in a world that too often forgets. The act closes with Barron looking out the window, his reflection merging with the fading sunlight. His expression is no longer conflicted but determined, his resolve marking the beginning of a deeper transformation. The plane touches down with a jarring thud, and the cabin fills with the usual sounds of disembarking. Seatbelts clicking, overhead bins opening, and passengers impatiently shuffling to their feet. Barron remains seated, his eyes trained on Earl as the veteran gathers his belongings with visible difficulty. Earl winces as he bends to retrieve his duffel bag, and Barron instinctively rises to help. "Let me carry that for you," Barron says, his voice calm but firm. "I've got it, son," Earl replies, his pride battling his frailty. But as Barron gently takes the bag and slings it over his shoulder, Earl doesn't resist. The aisle is congested with passengers jostling for position, many too preoccupied to notice the scene unfolding. Barron stands tall behind Earl, shielding him from the impatient crowd. The businessman from earlier watches with mild amusement, shaking his head as if to say, "What's the point?" The two men finally step off the plane and into the bustling airport terminal. Earl pauses, leaning on his cane as he surveys the chaos. "Well, this is where we part ways," he says with a small smile, his tone final. But Barron isn't ready to let go. "Where are you headed?" he asks. Earl hesitates, clearly unused to anyone taking such an interest in him. "Just catching a shuttle to the bus station. Got a long ride back home." Barron frowns. He pictures Earl sitting alone on a crowded bus, carrying his burdens in silence yet again. The thought is unbearable. "How about I walk with you to the shuttle?" Barron offers. Earl chuckles. "You're persistent, I'll give you that." As they make their way through the terminal, Barron notices the crowd parting slightly, many passengers casting curious glances. He's used to the attention, though it feels different this time. Less about him and more about the dynamic between the two. Near the shuttle stop, the moment arrives that changes everything. A group of young veterans, recognizable by their jackets, stands nearby, waiting for their ride. One of them spots Earl and immediately approaches. "Sir, were you in Vietnam?" the young man asks, his voice filled with admiration. Earl nods, surprised but pleased. "Yeah, a long time ago." The veteran salutes him, and others soon follow, creating a ripple effect of respect that catches the attention of nearby onlookers. Earl, visibly moved, straightens his posture, his weariness momentarily forgotten. Barron steps back, watching the scene unfold. He sees the spark of pride in Earl's eyes, a flicker of recognition and gratitude that had been missing before. It's a moment that feels bigger than both of them, a public acknowledgement of a man who has quietly carried his sacrifices for decades. Earl turns to Barron, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "I don't know why you went out of your way for an old man like me, but thank you. You've done more than you realize." Barron shakes his head. "I didn't do anything extraordinary. I just did what felt right." As the shuttle arrives, Earl boards with his duffel bag, but not before giving Barron a firm handshake, a gesture filled with unspoken respect and gratitude. The bus pulls away, leaving Barron standing alone, but for the first time, he feels completely at peace. The climax ends with Barron walking back into the terminal, his head held high. He isn't just someone caught in the shadow of his family's name anymore. He's someone who has found his own way to make a difference. As Barron walks through the terminal, the bustling crowd feels quieter, less chaotic. The weight he carried when he first boarded the plane has lifted, replaced by a sense of clarity. He pulls the note Earl wrote him from his pocket and reads it again. The shaky handwriting, the heartfelt words. It feels like a gift, a small piece of wisdom passed down from one generation to another. Barron's phone buzzes in his pocket. It's a text from his mother, landed safely. He types back a quick reply. "Yes. I'll call later." For once, he doesn't feel the usual pressure of expectations that comes with being who he is. Today, his actions were his own, not driven by public scrutiny or family legacy. As he makes his way toward baggage claim, Barron notices a young boy sitting with his parents on a bench. The boy is clutching a toy soldier, making it march across his knee. It's a simple image, but it strikes Barron deeply, a reminder of Earl's past sacrifices and the generations who came after. Near the exit, Maria, the flight attendant, catches up to him. "There you are," she says, slightly out of breath. "I wanted to thank you again before you left. What you did back there, it mattered. You might not see it now, but you made a difference." Barron smiles modestly. "I didn't do anything big, just helped someone who deserved better." Maria shakes her head. Sometimes the smallest gestures have the biggest impact. People see them, feel them, and they ripple outward. She hesitates, then adds, "I think that veteran will carry what you did with him for a long time." Barron nods, her words sinking in. The thought of Earl, standing a little taller, feeling a little more seen, fills him with quiet pride. As he steps outside, the cold air hits him, sharp and bracing. The world feels larger somehow, its possibilities more tangible. He pulls his hood up against the wind and walks toward the rideshare pickup zone. A man waiting nearby recognizes him and approaches cautiously. "Hey, you're Barron Trump, right? I saw what you did on the plane." Barron braces himself, expecting a comment about his family or status, but the man surprises him. "That was a good thing you did for that veteran. We need more people like you out there." Barron offers a small smile. "Thanks," he says simply, before climbing into his ride. As the car pulls away, he leans back in his seat, reflecting on everything that's happened. The day began like any other, yet it ended with a profound realization. Kindness doesn't need an audience, and doing what's right doesn't require grandeur. The camera lingers on Barron as the car emerges onto the highway, the city lights stretching out before him. His gaze is steady, his expression calm, as the narrator's voice returns one last time. Sometimes restoring faith in humanity isn't about changing the world. It's about changing someone's world. And sometimes all it takes is one quiet act of kindness. The story ends with Barron looking out the window, the note from Earl still in his hand. The screen fades to black, leaving the audience with the lingering warmth of a lesson learned and a difference made.